Hello, I'd like to give you a short presentation on one of the candidates who's standing for the Change UK party. His name is Jan-Vincent Rostowski. Now, I thought very long and hard before making this video, but the recent behaviour of the Change UK party, especially around making very bad accusations against people from other political parties, and really led me to make this video. And part of the reason I'm making this video is Mr. Rostowski actually has a history in Poland. He used to be the finance minister in Poland. And one thing, if you've lived in Poland for any amount of time, you'll realise is the reporting about Poland in the UK press is actually rather selective. So what I'd like to do is to set the record straight. Now, if you look at the description of the video, there are quite a lot of sources in both English and Polish. So now I'm going to give you an overview of what the sources are telling you and try to bring out the key points and put it into some context. I invite you to look at the sources and to make up your own mind as to what they mean. Also, this also means that nothing I'm actually going to say isn't supported by the sources and hasn't already been reported extensively by the Polish press and occasionally, sometimes in passing, by the English language press, normally outside the UK. So good luck with lawyers, okay? It's not going to work. Who is he? Who is he really? Well, as I said, he's had a history in Poland because he's a UK and Polish dual national. And before he went into politics, he actually had an academic career. You can look on the Wikipedia page for that and Google that. That's actually not so important. What's probably more important is he did serve as the finance minister in Poland for about 7 years under the previous government, which was led by Civic Platform. Now, he's standing as an MEP candidate for London for the Change UK, with basically he's Gavin Esler's running mate. Now, there's one big question: why isn't he sitting as an MEP in Poland? Let's give you some background to this. Why I started looking into this was I actually have clients in Poland, and when I just mentioned, your ex-finance minister standing as an MEP in London, and they laughed. Oh, what? What's so funny? So they explained to me, and I've asked some other clients as well. His brand is, to be fair to say, somewhat tarnished in Poland. You'll probably want to see what I'm about to present and the press reports in the sources below. You actually begin to get a feeling why he probably wasn't offered a MEP posting offer. Now, I'm not for sure whether he's actually sought one, although I personally suspect that may be the case. But it's probably telling the reaction to him standing in as an MEP in London. I'm going to quote the spokeswoman of the ruling Law and Justice Party, Peace, and she said, and this is a translation, "They did not want him in Poland. He is starting again in London." And this somewhat concurs with the polls I've been speaking to, that he's either not asked or didn't get a MEP slot in Poland. Again, I can't be sure exactly what went on. There's no reports of that, although the report, obviously the reaction from the Peace spokeswoman is indicative of that. Now, it's interestingly here, when you start reading the reports in the UK and the reports in Poland, because the Polish media, even say the liberal TVN channel, are actually somewhat bemused by my reading. But though the UK media, which is generally pro-Remain, is actually supportive, and you have someone like George Osborne actually giving him a lot of support, as you can see by George Osborne's tweet. Look, what I want to do is talk about 3 issues around values of London. Because, you know, I've worked in London, I've lived in London, I've been brought up in and around London. One thing you may know, if there's been any coverage of Rostowski which has actually been negative in nature, was that he actually made some rather possibly unfortunate, possibly could be, interpreted as maybe homophobic remarks. Okay, and this actually surprisingly was picked up by a BuzzFeed journalist. You'll see the tweet on the screen. Change UK did some very quick damage limitation. He recanted his statements, etc. Unfortunately, but you kind of need to just. I just wanted to invite you to just dig a little further into this because the discussion stopped there. There was a rather unfortunate quote in Gazeta Wyborcza, which was reported from Newsweek.pl. Gazeta Wyborcza has a paywall. It's not easy always to read the articles if you're not Polish and paying. In Britain, gay couples adopt children. Let us not denude ourselves, but this is a slippery slope. But probably to me, the quote that actually disturbed me most was the following: "It is not my business to say who is gay at the highest level of peace." This is the current government, was the opposition when he was in government. So it's not my business to say who's gay at the highest level of peace, but the LGBT community should consider whether this certain conspiracy of silence should not be interrupted. Now, this is obviously a translation. And so I went to my Polish friend and said, is he asking people to out other MPs? Because, my Polish is not nowhere near perfect. It's rather basic. And they said, yeah, could be read like that. So I'm not saying whether or not that was his intent, but let us just say that my reading of the Polish is somewhat unfortunate. And it doesn't really sit well for anyone who's actually lived in London, because London's a very live and let live attitude towards other people's sexuality. And really, it's none of anyone's damn business as to whether you're gay, straight, or anything else. So, and in UK politics, these kind of statements would not go down well at all. So this is something where I think actually the UK media has probably has underreported exactly what went on in some of the statements. Now, before you say, well, this is Polish politics, well, maybe. I think it's unfair to tar Poles with this type of brush, but let's be absolutely clear about one thing. He was very expensively educated in London. He spent his formative years in London. He had an academic career in and around London. He knows that this type of thing is unacceptable. And doesn't matter whether we were saying it in Poland or not, it's just not. So in my mind, these are not statements I'd ever want to be to hear. The other thing that's not been touched upon at all was his record as finance minister. And he was finance minister for 7 years. And during that time, VAT fraud in Poland was, rampant. It's worth a video on its own, actually, to talk about this. But over 7 years, VAT fraud reached an estimated 250 billion Polish zloty. That's about 50 billion pounds sterling, more or less. Okay, or to put it into a more meaningful context, it's over those 7 years, an entire year's Polish state budget was lost to VAT fraud when he was in charge of the finance ministry. It wasn't as if there was any evidence of actually there being effective enforcement during that period. To quote the pro-EU website financialobserver.eu, the picture that ordinary Poles got was one of a vast machine that could be directed at them, honest taxpayers, and not at the culprits. Meanwhile, vast sums had been stolen from the government's coffers. Now, I'm not saying anything illegal has happened from any government ministers. There is an official investigation. It's still ongoing. He has been called in to explain himself. If you're finance minister and roughly 1/7 of the state budget you could have collected in tax every year wasn't collected, then obviously there are questions to be asked. And some of you may actually ask, well, who cares? And, well, it's just tax anyway. Well, let's put it this way. The government that took over, the Law and Justice, actually, over the last few years, as soon as they got in power, tightened up on the VAT compliance. They tightened up really quite well. Again, this is worth a video on its own. And one of the things that the extra tax money actually funded was a program known as Rodzina 500+, Family 500+ in English. Now, this is basically child benefit. For every child from your second onwards, or if you're poor, every child from your first, the family gets 500 zloty a month, roughly £100 a month. Now, you may think that's not so much. In UK terms, maybe. In Polish terms, this is an infinite amount of money when you remember that the minimum wage is a bit over 2,000 zloty a month. Also, there's real poverty in Poland. Even still with the economic growth, you go to Warsaw, you think, oh, everything's rich, it's booming. You go outside, even some parts of outer Warsaw, there is some real poverty there. This has actually made a real difference to poor families. And by poverty, I'm talking about real poverty. I'm talking about children actually going to bed hungry type levels of poverty. Not being able to give them children what they need to go to school levels of poverty. Okay, and this has made a real difference. The previous Prime Minister of the current peace government, they've changed Prime Ministers once, but the first one was quoted as saying about how they funded it was enough not to steal, or in this case, it was enough not to allow people to steal from the government. So this is actually quite an impact, because if you recall back when I was a child, there was a lot of complaints about Margaret Thatcher, but well, the only thing that got stolen from school children was milk. This is potentially a lot more serious, depending on your judgment. So again, have a look at the sources and the VAT mafia about how the VAT was lost. But as I can say, over 7 years on his record, about an entire year's state budget wasn't collected in VAT when it really should have been. Finally, there are also issues around meritocracy, which is a very strong value in London. And somebody who's lived, worked, brought up in and around London, it's important to me. There is a problem at the moment that the Brits don't actually feel their political class respects them in any way. There's a similar feeling in Poland. This is worth reporting as a general level of context. It's often said to me by a number of my clients that until about the last 10 years maybe, if you actually wanted to be rich in Poland, the easiest way was to become a politician or to be well connected to one. And there was a scandal, again, it was in the previous government, where politicians were taped having conversations. It wasn't necessarily that anyone was taped doing anything illegal. That wasn't the case. What was, however, and I think it's worth quoting the Washington Post's analysis of this, was that Poles were angered that politicians, lobbyists and business people were debating political strategies and deals while dining over baby lobster paid for with taxpayers' money. Baby lobster is not cheap. If you see some of these articles and you hear some of the bills that were being quoted, it's like it was a month's minimum wage for the meal at that meeting with a few politicians. Our friend was one of these people wrapped up in that. As I said, it does give a context, and it possibly also gives a context as to why being an MEP is quite popular in Poland in the political classes. It's very well paid. There's a lot of nice EU gravy when you're an MEP. Even if you're British, it's a great deal. Imagine if you're Polish with a much lower wages. Their local politicians are not paid as well as the British ones. There also were some other accusations. I'm going to use the word accusation here because, there is no evidence that any laws were broken. And again, I'm just reporting what the press has reported on. You might see a picture of his daughter next to some very tasteful posters on the slide. There were accusations that his daughter got a job. Again, these are press reports, and you can make up your own mind. But there were accusations that his daughter managed to gain a position in I believe it was the foreign, if I recall, it's a foreign ministry. Although she didn't have the normal qualifications. Again, have a look at the sources. But to quote from the Liberal TVN website, again translated, one commentator quoted, "This is a very strange thing. I would never hire a child of another minister in such a position." There's a lot of what's gone on here, which you may or may not think, some of these points may not be so serious to you, some may be more serious. Again, look at the sources, make your own judgment. But given that the press has actually not really reported well on Poland about anything in the last few years, and it's taken a very biased line on what's going on in Poland. Also that, well, to be perfectly honest, I've been very unhappy about how Change UK have actually behaved in terms of what they've said to other politicians. I think it's probably worth somebody living in Poland actually spending some time to record a video and setting the record straight. So thank you for your time on that. Now, if you are a Remain voter and you really do want to vote for Remain, personally, I'd vote for the Liberal Democrats. They've not been such a disaster to watch. Or if you're a Remain voter, maybe take my advice. Stay at home and actually respect the referendum. Just saying. But anyway, thank you very much for your time. And again, read through the sources. Many of them are in Polish, but Google Translate is your friend. And just make up your own mind. Okay, thank you very much.